Good day, guys. Just looking at some of the other issues related to sort of long COVID type symptoms and issues. So both these, I'm going to, based on what we've actually been noticing recently, and a number of doctors have been talking about people that have done the mRNA types, that have either had COVID or stuff like that. They have noticed certain things happening with red blood cells and stuff like that. Now it's when we've got a number of suspicions, but it's still not completely clear on some of these factors, how some of the proteins and whether it's sort of the way they embed and anchor themselves onto a cell and how they get cleaved off and stuff like that. It's a bit murky, but it seems to have an effect on blood cells, so, and it's sort of a very interesting thing why this is happening. This will happen even with it actually happens with COVID, but it seems to some people that have had the mRNA one seem to be getting certain similar things. Now, let me just share my screen. Okay. So this is basically, there's a pre-proof. So it is at the moment, it's gone through some peer review. It's going through certain reviews and stuff like that and being looked at. This is out of Germany. So the Max Planck, let me just, I believe the Max Planck Institute is also involved in this study as well. Anyway, it's in Biophysical Journal. It was actually published. Physical phenotype of blood cells is altered in COVID-19. Okay, I'm just going to go down here. We found significant changes in lymphocyte stiffness, so monocyte size, so that your red blood cells, that seem to sort of, when they get infected, a person with COVID, what seems to happen is the red blood cells seem to be affected, and they seem to actually slightly enlarge and slightly become like, it's like they become a puffy, get a puffiness. They seem to contract again after once the ailment is gone, but don't actually come back to the normal size and stuff like that. And so we've still, we've seen this happen in other viruses, certain similar things, so we've got an idea of some of the mechanisms, but we still don't understand all the causal type stuff. We observe the phenomenon, we know that it happens. So it's actually definitely does happen to people that get COVID-19. So that's what they've actually seen. And this deforming and changing is a key thing. So this is the long-term changes to blood cell triggered by COVID-19, using real-time deformability cytometry, research from Max Planck Center for Physical and Medicine, FAU, was able to prove that for the first time that COVID-19 infections cause significant changes in the size, stiffness of red and white blood cells, sometimes lasting several months. These findings may help explain why some patients still suffer symptoms long after first contracting the virus, what they call long COVID. And we're seeing something similar with the mRNA ones, the viral vector ones, because remember, they are going in there and actually just producing shitloads spikes. They embed themselves into membranes like rafts. They anchor themselves, and you get this cleavage off with S proteins and their reactivity around the body. So maybe these S proteins are basically interacting with red blood cells and white blood cells, and sort of, there are complicated sort of interactions, and that will happen with both the real virus, and also will happen with the actual, I believe that there is a risk with these viral vector and mRNA types as well, because they are mimicking slightly the same replication and sort of way the virus itself actually operates, so getting in there and just using the replication machinery of the body and creating a lot of basically viral material. So I think there's concerns, and we've actually seen certain people, some people are more susceptible than others. It's in the early days, so it's very hard to know exactly how severe this issue is. It's still unclear in that regard. So look, I'm not going to speculate. I do have concerns. I'll be quite candid about it, that I have concerns. We know that these spikes will get this cleavage happening to them, and these S proteins after the vaccinations will be circulating around. So I think that there's a risk with that. And that's probably why I've been concerned about these type of vaccination methods that are not traditional. So that's where my concern comes from, these sort of things. I mean, one thing you don't have to worry about in regards to the Novavax one, it just doesn't get cleaved to make S1 proteins. So, so the actual cleavage site in the Novavax, I mean, this is why, it's been mutated to keep that from happening. It's probably the one reason where, when I've looked at Novavax era from all these different angles, the cleavage side, all these different ways that things could become problematic. And they seem to basically, the ability for these spikes to anchor themselves in that way. Nope. They've stuck those proline amino acids to prevent that anchoring effect. So they've really got out of their way to think about all sorts of possible sort of negatives, and I'm still struggling to find anything negative. Obviously, that 70-year period is still going to be always an issue, so I can't neglect that part. I've got to be honest about that. But I personally, myself, but as I said, I mean, even when you actually look at animal studies, they've sort of shown sort of that, the spikes or the S1 proteins can indeed, they can have an effect on living cells, on the tissues themselves. They can have negative effects. So there's a lot of question marks in a lot of that. So I'm not going to speculate, but we need more research. Really important that we understand the sort of interactions that are happening, and I don't think we've got a handle on it yet. So this is good research coming out of Germany, where they're actually looking at the way the actual virus. We know that these other methods, Pfizer, Moderna, the AstraZeneca, all these ones, Sputnik, are using methods which are more akin to the way the virus would operate. So I do have concerns in terms of, these long COVID type effects. It's still unclear whether these types of vaccines have that potential risk in causing some of these modifications. So the research has only been done on COVID-19 patients, not on people vaccinated. So that's a speculation on my part, a potential risk. I'm not saying that is a risk. That would be I'd be a crackpot if I said that, because I've got no research to back it up. All I'm saying is that there are a lot of similarities, the way these operate and the actual virus itself. And if the virus is causing these changes, these alterations in red and white blood cells, is there potential risk with these other ones? There is a potential risk. So I leave it up to you. This is not medical advice. This is my personal opinion. Another reason why I would not take that approach, those other approaches in that regard. Now, you can actually see the sort of changes that are happening in, the sort of those volumetric changes that are happening in the actual, the way they're actually changing the morphology in that regard, from a much smaller size to a much more scattered and altered shape. And it doesn't seem to come back to the normal shape is what they're showing. Now, let's get in. Remember the word that I actually talked about? Very important. This is the measurement, deformability, and cytometry. Anyway, so what can we do? Well, our dear friend vitamin D. So, now let's look at this with erythrocytes and wide range of sort of cells. I'm going to go down, cover this part. Vitamin D influences the early development of monocytes and in variant natural killer T cells and further maturation some immune cells. Findings regarding the regulation of gene expression have revealed that there are links between the action of vitamin D and cytokines. Whilst we do not have as yet an entire clear picture on that matter, there are health benefits of the immune system from vitamin D supplementation. Now, we now know the same cytokines also instruct the development of a particular type of red of blood cell. Okay, so it's probably the cytokines that are induced and can alter the morphology, and so vitamin D again plays an important role to regulate a lot of that sort of stuff. So as you can see, the early part of these sort of blood cells, you can see as they evolve, vitamin D is right there as a big player in regulating how they're actually, their morphology in that regard. And that's the sort of the key sort of message I want to sort of pass, that I can't give you a silver bullet type thing, but when it has to do with the way these blood cells tend to basically develop, vitamin D is again there sort of as an important regulator I mean, the whole immune system is full of vitamin D receptors. And I think that the way these, this is my personal opinion anyway, that I think the immune cell types, they're, the way they mature, their functionality and all that is really tied back to vitamin D. I think vitamin D plays a really important role. And, I mean, I don't have a study that actually shows taking vitamin D will prevent those red blood cell, white blood cells from distorting, deforming, or not changing. But I think by looking at, the research talking about, the way I'm actually extrapolating is I'm looking at an important regulator of the cytokines. And we know that the cytokines have an effect on, the red blood cells and the white blood cells. So we know that there's an effect there. So the question is, since we know that vitamin D has a regulatory effect, my personal belief, this is my personal belief, but they haven't done the research. I can't give you here's a study that shows this, but my personal belief is that in a population where you've got a lot of low vitamin D status, which is the majority of the population, they're either severely deficient or mildly deficient, so a third of the population is severely deficient. More than 2/3, probably up to 70% are, moderately deficient. And everybody else, in different amounts of moderation to slight to higher. I think that when you've got a good regulated immune system, the virus can't really get out of control to really do a lot of damage, and that's what we see when you've got vitamin D. Vitamin D seems to knock the damn thing out for, like Mira, she took proactively, quickly, took injections of 10,000 IUs of the active form. This is not the supplemental form. This is the active form, the 25-OHD, which can immediately be provided to the immune system, to the receptors. So it can be then converted to 125, and because it's available. It's in the stored form, and that's the type of in the injectable form that she was given. So her body was immediately able to respond. That's why she recovered so quickly. And I think that's why she doesn't have any symptoms. She feels fine. I think that if you've got a low vitamin D status, and once this virus takes over and takes control, it starts, causing a lot of inflammation, a lot of cytokines, a lot of damage to red blood cells, to white blood cells, to all sorts of tissues around the place, until the body eventually brings it under some control, or it kills you, one of the two. And I think vitamin D is the key thing here, because your immune system is just coated with vitamin D receptors. And I think that the critical thing is to stop the cytokine storm, to stop this damaging effect to tissue, to slow it down, to mitigate it. And I think that that's the only solution. Now we're finding that, that people's red blood cells are not going back to the normal shape. They're much larger. They're distorted, and already, and they're stiffer. And I've discussed this before about how, even, plant-based cholesterol can get in there and stiffen the red blood cells. And so, it's bad enough that people eating shit, species inappropriate food. On top of that, they've got a vitamin D deficiency. That's probably aggravating this condition of stiffness and distortion of these red blood cells, which means that they are finding it difficult getting through those nook and crannies, because in some parts of the, your vascular tree, some of these blood vessels are very narrow. The actual red blood cells need to elongate themselves to get through. And there's a potential here for hypoxia to happen. Maybe this damaging effect, these distorted effects of the red blood cells, is basically increasing the hypoxic environment in the lungs, and actually even exacerbating the damage in the lungs when you get COVID, because the inability, because those blood vessels in the lungs are very narrow, so if you're affecting the red blood cells, well, they're going to be struggling to get through or elongate through if they're stiffer as well. So they can create a much more hypoxic and much more problematic environment in the lungs. So as I said, this lung damaging effect that actually happens through COVID could be through a number of mechanisms. And I think vitamin D is an important play because it brings down the cytokine storm. It prevents that cytokine storm from happening. It regulates the immune system, the over response and stuff like that, and the over damaging effect. And I suspect it has a protective effect on the blood, the blood, red blood cells and the white blood cells. That's my personal opinion. That's extrapolating from all the research that I'm aware of when it comes to vitamin D. And I think it's really, it's another reason why I sound like a broken record, but I have to emphasize the importance of maintaining good vitamin D status. We no longer live an ancestral lifestyle. We really have fucked the way we live. We've disconnected ourselves from the sun. We eat inappropriately. All these sort of things are basically making us immunocompromised, weaker, more susceptible. We may need to take stock of this sort of thing. And if there's one take-home message that is so damn important that you focus on for yourselves and your families, is basically that you need to maintain good vitamin D status throughout the year, and you need to stop fearing the sun. You need to be eating species appropriate food and trying to access the sun. In particular, people with darker skin, that's really important because it takes multiple hours to get the same level of vitamin D that it takes somebody with a lighter skin. So people with a darker skin, you guys are way more at risk of these sort of conditions. It's probably the reason, it is the damn reason why the numbers of, people from the Horn of Africa were more susceptible in Sweden than a lot of the Swedes who have a tendency of supplementing vitamin D all year round. Because it's become a bit of a tradition since the last couple of decades, where the people coming from the Horn of Africa have never had to. So it's never been part of their tradition. And plus they're more susceptible because of darker skin, much harder. You need to be in let's say, a tropical or subtropical environment and be exposed for quite a few hours, let alone living in Sweden, where you literally have much lower levels, even if you're outdoors all day, let alone basically the pigment of your skin that's going to reduce the amount you can actually absorb. So it's even more critical. I would say somebody with a darker skin, if you're living in North America or living in basically Northern Europe or places like that, you should be supplementing all year round. That is the reality. That's what you should be doing, whether you're outdoors or not. Unless you're actually spending quite a large part of the year in the tropics, you should be supplementing far more. And I think that's the take home message for everyone. You want a properly regulated immune system to prevent some of these damaging effects of, not only this virus, COVID, but any other future thing. Your immune system needs to be kept in a good state. And the best thing you can do for your immune system is vitamin D. And don't listen to some of the idiots out there that basically have a hostility towards it. Those people are going to put you at risk long term. So hope you sort of got something out of this. It's not meant to basically provide fear or anything like that or scare people. It's more to basically remind people the importance of vitamin D and maintaining a good vitamin D status. And remember, vitamin D requires cholesterol. So eat a species appropriate diet and don't avoid the sun. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. See yous.